Daniel gripped the steering wheel, fatigue settling in after hours on the road. He was on a business trip, headed to a conference in Albany. The winter of 1998 had been harsh, blanketing upstate New York in layers of snow. Daniel had hoped to reach Albany before nightfall, but a late start and heavy traffic had delayed his journey. As darkness fell, Daniel found himself driving through the small town of Cleary's End. He spotted a vacancy sign flickering weakly outside a quaint old hotel. The building, with its faded paint and looming silhouette, seemed to sag under the weight of the years. Exhaustion outweighed his reservations, and Daniel decided to stop for the night. The biting cold seeped into his bones as he stepped out of the car. His breath formed clouds in the frigid air. Daniel hurried towards the warmth promised by the hotel's glowing windows, unaware of the strangeness that awaited him within its walls. The lobby was dimly lit and eerily silent, as if the very walls were holding their breath. The air was thick with an unsettling stillness, broken only by the occasional creak of the old wooden floorboards. Dust motes danced in the pale light filtering through a heavy velvet curtain, creating an almost ethereal glow in the otherwise gloomy room. It was as if time had stopped, trapping the dust in an eternal ballet. Behind a massive oak counter sat a lone figure, a woman with tired eyes and a tightly drawn mouth. Her expression was one of weariness, as if she had seen too many travelers come and go, each leaving a piece of their story behind. She looked up as Daniel approached, her gaze unsettlingly intense, piercing through the dim light. It was a look that seemed to hold secrets, stories untold, and perhaps a warning. "Just me," Daniel said, trying to break the silence that felt almost tangible. His voice echoed slightly, adding to the eerie atmosphere of the lobby. He signed the guest registry with a hand that trembled slightly, whether from the cold or the atmosphere, he couldn't be sure. The pen felt heavy in his hand, as if it too carried the weight of the hotel's history. The receptionist, without a word, slid a key across the counter. Her movements were slow and deliberate, as if she was performing a ritual. It was heavy, brass and ice-cold, sending a shiver down Daniel's spine as he picked it up. The key felt ancient, like it had unlocked many doors before this one. "Room 308, she finally spoke, her voice a low murmur that barely broke the silence. It was as if she was sharing a secret meant only for him. "Top floor, end of the hall, quietest room we have," she added, her words hanging in the air like a lingering echo. There was a beat of silence. Then she added, "At least for some folks." Her cryptic remark left Daniel with a sense of unease, but he chose not to question it. Daniel, though puzzled by her cryptic remark, simply nodded, collected the key, and made his way towards the stairs. Each step he took seemed to echo louder than the last, amplifying the silence around him. The hallway on the third floor was shrouded in shadows, the dim light barely penetrating the darkness. It felt like stepping into another world, one where the past and present coexisted in uneasy harmony. The air was thick with the smell of dust and decay, a stark contrast to the crisp winter air outside. It was as if the hallway had been forgotten by time, left to gather dust and memories. Room 308 was at the very end of the hallway, as promised. The door looked old and worn, its number barely visible in the dim light. As Daniel unlocked the door and stepped inside, he felt an inexplicable wave of unease wash over him. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for him to make the first move. The room was freezing, the air heavy and still. It was as if the very walls were watching him, waiting to see what he would do next. Daniel tried to shake off the unsettling feeling that clung to the room. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, as if the walls themselves were closing in on him. He couldn't quite place it, but there was an eerie sense of being watched, a prickling sensation at the back of his neck that refused to go away. He was exhausted, he told himself. The long drive and the strangeness of the hotel were playing tricks on his mind. The journey had been grueling, the endless stretch of road blurring into a monotonous grey. The hotel, with its faded grandeur and musty smell, only added to his disorientation. He unpacked his bag, placing his things on the dusty dresser, its surface marred by rings left by long-forgotten glasses. Each item he placed seemed to disturb a layer of dust, sending tiny particles dancing in the dim light. The room felt like it hadn't been touched in years, a relic of a bygone era. Above the dresser hung an antique mirror, its surface cloudy with age. The glass was so murky that it barely reflected his image, giving him a distorted, ghostly appearance. It was as if the mirror held secrets of its own, memories trapped within its tarnished frame. He noticed a faint handprint smudged on the glass, a ghostly impression that sent a shiver down his spine. The handprint was small, almost childlike, and it seemed to pulse with a life of its own, as if it had been left there moments ago. He finally lay down on the bed, the mattress lumpy and uncomfortable. It creaked under his weight, the springs groaning in protest. He shifted, trying to find a position that didn't make his back ache, but it was futile. He closed his eyes, willing himself to sleep. But sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and plagued with unsettling dreams. He dreamt of shadowy figures and endless corridors of whispers that seemed to follow him wherever he went. He woke with a start. His heart was pounding and his skin was clammy with sweat. The room was eerily silent, the kind of silence that felt heavy and oppressive. His digital alarm clock glowed 2:47 a.m. The numbers seemed to burn into his retinas, a stark reminder of the ungodly hour. The room was dark. The only sound, the faint ticking of an old clock somewhere in the walls. The ticking was irregular, almost as if the clock itself was struggling to keep time. And then he heard it, whispers, soft and indistinct, coming from the very air around him. They were barely audible at first, like the rustling of leaves, but they grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to slither around him, chilling him to the bone. The whispers were everywhere, surrounding him, filling the room with their eerie presence. "Get out!" they urged, their voices a chorus of hushed warnings. The words were clear now, each syllable dripping with urgency. "Get out now before he comes." The warning was unmistakable, and it sent a jolt of fear through him. His heart pounded in his chest, a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Each beat felt like a hammer blow, echoing in the silence. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if sensing his rising fear. They seemed to feed off his terror, growing stronger with each passing second. He sat up in bed, his eyes wide, searching the darkness for the source of the voices. The room seemed to close in around him, the shadows deepening, becoming more menacing. A sudden crack, sharp and clear, cut through the whispers. It was a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The antique mirror above the dresser had split down the middle, the faint handprint now bisected by a jagged line. The crack seemed to pulse with a life of its own, a silent scream frozen in glass. Terror, raw and consuming, seized Daniel. He scrambled off the bed, his movements fueled by pure adrenaline. As if in answer to his fear, the closet door in the corner creaked open slowly, revealing only an abyss of darkness within. He didn't wait to see what might emerge from its depth. He grabbed his coat and fled, his bare feet slapping against the cold wooden floor. He raced down the hallway, the whispers seeming to follow him, urging him onward. He burst through the lobby, his breath ragged, his eyes wild with terror. The receptionist, still behind the counter, didn't seem surprised to see him. She looked at him, her expression a mixture of pity and grim understanding. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, her voice devoid of surprise. "There were voices," Daniel stammered, his voice trembling, "and the mirror, it just cracked." The receptionist sighed, a tired, weary sound. "Room 308, she said, shaking her head. "It's been empty for years. No one stays there anymore. No one who wants to leave, at least." Daniel stared at her, his mind reeling. "But you gave me the key," he protested, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes," she replied, her gaze steady. "But I never said anyone stayed the night." The rest of the night passed in a blur. Daniel's mind was a whirlwind of confusion and fear, unable to settle on any one thought for long. Daniel, wrapped in a blanket provided by the unsettlingly calm receptionist, huddled near the dying embers of the fireplace in the lobby. The warmth of the fire did little to ease the chill that had settled deep within him. He tried to make sense of what had happened, but the events of the night seemed to slip through his grasp like grains of sand. Every time he thought he had a handle on it, the memory would shift and change, leaving him more bewildered than before. The first rays of dawn painted the sky with hues of grey and pale pink as Daniel finally drifted into a restless sleep. His dreams were haunted by shadowy figures and echoing whispers, offering no respite from his waking fears. When he woke, stiff and disoriented, the lobby was empty. He was alone. The silence of the hotel was almost deafening, amplifying his sense of isolation. He decided to try and find the receptionist, hoping for some kind of explanation. The lobby, once a place of warmth and comfort, now felt cold and unwelcoming. He climbed the stairs to the third floor, his footsteps echoing in the eerie silence of the hallway. Each step seemed to take an eternity, the anticipation building with every creak of the old wooden stairs. But when he reached the end where room 308 should have been, there was nothing. Just an empty space where the door should have stood. The hallway simply ended in a blank wall, its faded wallpaper uninterrupted. It was as if the room had never existed. There was no sign of a door, no trace of room 308. The wall was smooth and unbroken, mocking his certainty. Daniel ran his hand over the smooth surface of the wall, his fingers tracing the faint outline of where a door jamb might have been. The sensation was both familiar and alien, sending shivers down his spine. A chill ran down his spine, and he quickly withdrew his hand as if burned. The wall felt unnaturally cold, almost as if it were alive. He was certain, absolutely certain, that room 308 had been there. He had been inside. The memories were too vivid to be a mere figment of his imagination. He had felt its oppressive atmosphere, heard its whispers. The room had a presence, a weight that pressed down on him, and yet there was no proof, no evidence that it had ever existed at all. The hotel seemed to have swallowed it whole, leaving no